This lecture is entitled East Asia and Chinese Diversity. Kind of begin, I think it's important to reflect upon Chinese ways of thinking about diversity. So generally speaking, in China, the idea is that the country doesn't have a single ethnic group, and that in fact the state has been ruled by a number of different ethnic groups throughout history. Those include the Han people, as well as others, including Mongolian people and Manchurian people, or Man. Now, the development of the Chinese state, sort of like, in other countries, has resulted in a confederation of these different groups. This is the way Chinese people think about their state and its relationship to the nation, if you will. China, rather than defining itself in terms of ethnicity, and here I think the U.S. is probably a good example, similar example, it defines itself in terms of its geopolitical territory and a multi-ethnic social system. Now, when I state this, I'm trying to give you an understanding of how, like we looked at for Thailand or like we looked at for India, how the state understands its own narrative of its own being. So I mentioned the idea of the Han people, and the Han really are the ethnic majority of China. And you see a large concentration of Han people, particularly in central China, between the Huang and Chang rivers. Here you can see this, the Yangtze, sometimes the Chang River is referred to in English, and the Huang River is sometimes referred to as the Yellow River. And so you see this area between sort of the heartland, the central part of China, and it's really the location of one of the earliest Chinese states, or the earliest Chinese state, approximately 1500 BC. And so this area has a really dense population, can be anywhere from 500 people per square mile, and it's a very important agricultural region as well. Now, the Han people, really by many modern definitions of ethnicity, are considered the largest group in the world. In fact, the Han number approximately 1 billion people. In China, they constitute about 92% of the population. But you do find Han people that live all throughout Asia. In fact, there is a significant Han population in Thailand, as well as many other Southeast Asian states such as Vietnam, Singapore, and Malaysia. And the Han people took their name from a name of a state that united a number of different groups politically in approximately 200 BC, so 2,000 plus years ago. There was a state ruled by the Han dynasty, and this ethnic group sort of traces its background to that time. That's where the ethnonym, or the name of the group, comes from. So Han people really dominate in that central China area, and we can think of other areas of China as well. We can think about the north and the northeast area of China as depicted here on this map, and this includes a number of different Chinese provinces as well as the Inner Mongolian Autonomous Region. So China, because it's a multi-ethnic country, it has both provinces on the one hand as well as autonomous regions. Now, a province can also have autonomous counties and things like that, but these are major areas that are known as autonomous regions, and Inner Mongolia is a large one. It's an interesting border region if we're thinking about the north here and the northeast, and it has a distinct history related to both, on the one hand, Mongolian speakers, but also Korean speakers. In fact, north and northeast China does have a Korean population as well, particularly along the border with North Korea. While there's a national language of Chinese, local areas have until recently been able to utilize their own local languages. So in areas where Koreans dominate in northeast China, until recently those areas would have had the right to use their own language for things like government meetings, radio broadcasts, television, and so on. Now, this is a really cold area, you can imagine, because it's bordering Siberia. Very cold winters and permafrost, and the idea, or permafrost, being the permanent maintenance of ice within the soil. So you do get that particularly in the most northern extents of northeast China. If we're thinking about nationality, and I use the term here because I kind of go between the term nationality, which is an English translation of a Chinese term, for the different ethnic groups. So this is a little bit of a different usage than in English. For U.S. English speakers, when we refer to nationality, we may refer to the United States of America as our nationalities, and then we may make a distinction between our nationality, right, and our ethnicity. So I may have Lithuanian ethnicity, although my nationality is of the US, this kind of way of American thinking. In China, there are ideas about diversity and ideas about nationality really come from a slightly different tradition. In particular, the tradition in the socialist world, where nation has a bit of a different meaning, and a nation, the idea, isn't assumed to have its own representative. And this is that kind of Western idea where you have France for the French people, Germany for the German people, and so on. And in the socialist tradition, the idea was that a government can represent many different nationalities. And so this is where this word or term nationality is used kind of in terms of what we would call ethnicity here in the United States. And Northeast China is really rich. We talked about some of the distinct populations like Mongolians. And then if you start sort of going beyond the basics, you can begin to understand the way that Inner Mongolia, this autonomous region, has particular Mongolian groups. And those Mongolian groups are different, let's say, than the groups that are in Outer Mongolia. And that in the western part of Inner Mongolia, there are distinct Mongol groups from those in the east, like the Korchen. And this is an important aspect of understanding the diversity of China. Now, Northeast China also has Tungusic-speaking people. So the Manchu people that were the rulers, really, of the last dynasty of China. They are Tungusic speakers, and this is a language family that you find among other Siberian peoples, both including in northeast China, but also across the border in Russia, in Siberia itself. For example, Evenki people are found in northeast China, and they are closely related culturally and linguistically to other Siberian groups. So we talked a little bit about that central China region, talked a little bit about the north and the northeast of China. We want to also think about south and southeast China as well. Now, these are areas of China that become settled by Han Chinese around 700 to 1300, the Tang and Song dynasties, if you've ever had any Chinese history. And you had this kind of southern expansion of Han people into those areas. So central China have a much longer history, right, of Han Chinese population. But through time, that population begins to expands into the northeast area of China, where you have Siberian peoples and you have Korean peoples and Mongolian peoples. And it also moves into the south, where you have areas that are Thai-speaking, so places that are known today as the Guangxi Zhuangzi Autonomous Region. And we've talked about the way Thai speakers moved later into Southeast Asia, into areas like Thailand. And this movement of Han people to the south is simultaneous, if you will. It is something that's affecting the other language family speakers in South China, who are many of which are displaced to move into other territories in Southeast Asia. So we find the Guangxi Zhuangzi, that area, being a concentration of Thai speakers even today. And you also find the province of Yunnan, which is very diverse and has other language families, other ethnic groups are represented there. Peoples who are speaking Tibetan languages, Burmese languages, Austroasiatic languages that we've talked about, and that are also seen in Southeast Asia. So central China, we've talked a little bit about the north and northeast of China. We've talked a little bit about the south of China. And then we should also include the western regions of China too. And these would include the Himalayan areas, the highlands of the Tibetan plateau, north of the Tibetan Plateau, the area known as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and this includes the Tarim Basin and the Taklamakan Desert that you see represented on the map there. If you continue moving northwards to the boundary with Mongolia, Russia, and Kazakhstan, you come up to mountain ranges such as the Tian Shan, as well as the Altai Mountains. Now, this includes the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which is fairly known outside of China. A lot of Americans have heard of Tibetan populations, and they're familiar with the notion of a Tibetan Autonomous Region. And then just mention this Uyghur Autonomous Region, which is the area north of Tibet that includes the Altai, the Tian Mountains, and then the Taklamakan Desert and Tarim Basin. And keep it simple at this point in time. A lot of people have heard about controversies around Tibet and Chinese control over Tibetan territory. And at this point, we could just argue that, from different historical positions, you can make different arguments, that there's been sort of complex political formations through time between areas to the east, areas that are predominantly Han, right? And then these areas of Western China that we're talking about. Depending on your political orientation, you can kind of create a narrative, right, which serves that particular set of political interests. Now, the Western China is very interesting for many different reasons, but it's very arid and has a lower population density, and has populations that people may not always be familiar with that are important Chinese populations. You have Turkic-speaking groups, that is, groups that when you think of Turkic language, you think of Turkey, you think of the area very close to Eastern Europe, and that is groups that moved from these areas of Inner and Central Asia a millennia ago, but they still have populations of Turkic-speaking peoples today. You have Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Uyghur, also a Turkic-speaking group in Western China. But you also have Indo-European speakers as well. You have Tajik language speakers, a language that's related to Persian or the language of Iran. You have Russian speakers in Xinjiang. Small population, about 8,000 people, but you do have Russian speakers there as well. So to kind of conclude today's introduction to China, we sort of began exploring diversity in Chinese thought and sort of the geography, if you will, of ethnicity in China, or nationality as it's referred in China itself. We talked a little bit about the Han majority, and then began to explore some of the regions of China and the ethnic minority peoples that can be found there.